What's the time? Perfect. Okay, thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, or good evening, or good night, or good morning to everybody. I am here from I am attending the European Bariatric Congress in Berlin, and in this occasion there is also the 20th anniversary, so it is the jubileum of the European College Bovine Health Management. Actually, I was before I was I wanted to start the webinar directly from the booth of the college, but now it's directly under the sun. It's very hot, and therefore I moved to the booth of another company, and there is here, I don't know, Peter, if you want to remove the share of the screen, because I want to introduce you, Chino. Thomas, give me Chino. Peter, if you remove, I show you who is giving with me the webinar. I don't know whether you can see. Chino,
I really don't. I don't want to remove the screen.
Anyway,
because we had problems to get the right.
I will introduce Chino again later. Chino. Okay, so thank you very much for everybody. As I mentioned it to you, the last month or 1 month ago, we had the webinar directly from Mexico, from the Congress in Tlaxcala. So, and this time we have the webinar directly from the Congress in Berlin. And what we are going to talk about this afternoon is something that is related to an important memory, an important award that is a memory of Professor Gustav Rosenberger, one of the column of the bariatrics in not only in Europe but in the world. And then we will have, let's say, a scientific part. The second part of the webinar will be the scientific part with one of the speakers, that is Marina von Keyserling, that has just finished to give her presentation here at the Congress. So therefore, the program is the following. Professor Theo Lam from University Utrecht in Netherlands, that is, we can say, the chairman of the Gustav Rosenberger Memorial Fund, will introduce this award. That is a very, very important award that is given practically every year, and it will explain you more in details. Then we will have the lucky to have here with us the winner of the award of this year, Chering Choden from Bhutan, and we asked her to introduce herself and to give some. So what are the expectations of a young researcher? And then the second part, as mentioned, it is on welfare in calves with Marina von Keyserling. Therefore, I would say, don't waste time. I immediately ask Theo Lam to introduce and to depict what is the Gustav Rosenberger Memorial Fund. Theo, please, thank you for having accepted to tell us what is this important award.
Thank you, Arcancello. You change it green?
It's on.
It's on.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Arcancello. Thanks for inviting me and giving this talk about Rosenberg. Is the sound okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, your camera is on. Your camera, yeah. You can see.
You don't want to put your camera on? No? Okay.
We're going to slide there.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a bit away because
Okay. Rosenberg Memorial Fund, the past, present, and future, and in fact,
You have to keep the block with you. Yeah.
and I'll talk about the past, future, and the present.
The past is that Professor Rosenberg was one of the founders of the Association. He was a professor in Hanover and school there
And as I said, we sort of founded the World Association of Pediatrics that we have every second year meeting with. And his masterpiece was diseases of cattle. And this is a bookcase in my room, in my working room, my study room. And there's one book there from a former colleague. That's better. And that is Rosenberg's Krankheit und das Wildes. I should say that I don't open it very often, but I look at it very often because it's in my bookcase. And does remember me that to be able to future, you have to look back once in a while and learn from the past. Rosenberg, he passed away in 1983. In 1982, he visited the World Pediatrics Congress in Amsterdam. And as I told this morning at the meeting here in Bergen, we had a positive financial result. We organized all that belongs to the whole community. So in 1984, the Gustav Rosenberg Memorial Fund was founded with the aim to promote the development of medicine worldwide. The award was originally only presented at the meetings of the World Pediatrics Association, the BBC meetings, WBC meetings. And since 2011, we present it on an annual basis. And we do that with promising veterinarians who come from countries where both development.
His microphone does not work on the laptop. If you can use yours, it's okay.
Peter, there is.
Yes.
We don't hear very well. I'm sorry.
You
Can
don't hear
try
us very well. I will try a different microphone. Wait a moment.
With you, we hear perfectly with you, but not the Theo microphone. Sorry.
I'm going to tell me now and then afterward.
I think you should just use your own speaker. Yeah. Maybe if you use just that speaker, and if we put this on, it works. Can you try?
Is it better now? Okay, Joe, can you hear me now? Can you understand me?
Try again.
No,
not really. No, not really. Not really. Not really.
So am I echoey as well?
Have some echo. Peter, why don't you use your microphone with Theo?
So am I echoey now?
Lena is better.
Yeah, I think it's because there's too many computers in that room trying to run Zoom.
Okay. Yeah, but okay, try again, Theo.
Hale's trying to connect to audio right now.
Can you hear me?
Now it's better.
Now it's better?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Try.
Now we go back to the presentation. Somehow. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, it's on.
It's on? And you can hear me? You
Yes.
still hear me? Can you still hear me? Somebody?
Yeah.
Yeah? So I can continue?
Yeah.
Okay, there we
Yeah.
go. So since 2011, we have this Rosenberger grant every year, and it consists of 10,000 euros to be used for research work, for studies. It can be used at the University of Good Name and Fame. In the past, that was have been Hanover and Utrecht and different universities.
I've lost you again.
I can only hear him through the door. I can't hear him as.
No, no,
on
no,
the-
no. No, Theo, we don't, Peter, we don't hear at all in this moment.
Yeah.
So
Can you
Arcangelo,
hear
can
me
you hear
now?
me without any trouble?
Hear me
So
now?
I hear Nina better. And
You hear better,
we
Okay,
hear,
Nina?
so I'm gonna go in and give him my computer and we'll
Yeah.
shut down the other computer. They just have to open the door.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
so Peter sound is good, Nina is good, but only the
Yeah. There's a
sound of
problem
Theo
with the
is-
microphone.
There's a problem with the microphone.
Maybe I can use
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah. Take that microphone and.
That works?
Actually, I'm not a fan of,
Okay. And you see the screen?
okay,
Okay.
okay, now it's
So that
perfect, now it's
grant is
perfect.
the research money and also the visit to the conference, which is here in Berlin this year. And that's only possible thanks to our sponsor, who currently is Boehringer Ingelheim, and have been some different pharmaceutical companies over the 40 years of our existence. And I'm proud that that Sharing, who's sitting next to me here, is the 25th award winner. And as you can see, we've had quite some over the years, and we are very proud that that we have them, and that we were able to have all these people visiting the different conferences, and now actually the 25. So thanks to Boehringer and former sponsors, we've made this possible. Going further to the future, next year the World Biotics Conference will be in Mexico in May in Cancun, and we hope that we can proudly present 2024 award winner there and then. To be able to for the future to be in this impressive list of winners, we open the submissions from the 1st of September on until Christmas, basically 24th of December. That's the deadline. And then during January, an independent committee, which is the board of the Gustav Rosenberger Fund, fully independent of a sponsor, will decide on which will be the winner for next year. And then in May, we
Again?
Sound is
Again? Better?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And with that, I will give the word to Charing Godin, who is our 25th award winner. So that's from the past to the future to the present, and she will tell us about her work, and I hope all technical devices will work. Glad to have you here. The floor is yours.
yeah, thank you, Theo.
Am I
Now we
audible? Am I audible? No?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So now
so I'll
Sharing
share my
Choudhury is
screen
the
now.
winner. Yeah,
I don't think we need this. Yeah. Yes.
Choudhury is from Bhutan, and she
please,
is
Tanya.
currently spending some time in Canada,
Mine?
University of
Can you see my screen?
Calgary,
Yeah.
running her
Presentation, fantastic.
research.
Oh.
Yes, Choudhury, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being on this platform, and good afternoon to you all. It's afternoon in Berlin, so good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are. And my name is Sharing Choudhury, and I'm from Bhutan. And this is a map of Bhutan. It's a very tiny country in the Himalayas, and it's between India and China. And on the left side, it's a very historical tourist attraction in Bhutan. So it's called the Tiger's Nest, where all the tourists want to go. So yeah, it's a really small country in the Himalayas. And then to talk something about my background. So currently I'm working with the Royal Civil Service Commission of Bhutan as a field veterinarian. And I'm on a sabbatical for doing my master's. And for my DVM degree, I went to India for 5 years, and then I returned back to Bhutan and then worked as a veterinarian. And my roles and responsibility as a field vet in Bhutan, where I mainly treated both large animal as well as small animals. So I work with the diagnosis and treatment of animal bovine diseases, and also I work for the prevention of the animal diseases. So mainly, which mainly includes immunization of the animal. And after working in Bhutan as a field vet and knowing the technologies and the lapses that we have back home, yet my interest I developed my interest in infectious diseases, and also I'm interested in translational research. That is mainly I wanted to bridge the connection between farmers and the lab, which is really lacking in my country at the moment. And also my interest is in molecular epidemiology. So, yep, with all this interest, I got connected with Dr. Frank Vandermeer at the University of Calgary, and I started as a master's student with the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University of Calgary in the fall 2021. And I'm working mainly in virology and molecular epidemiology at the University of Calgary. So yeah, with this, I would like to take this opportunity just to introduce and show a little bit about what I'm doing at the University of Calgary, and then I'll walk you through my main purpose of the day, that is what I'm gonna do with the Gustav Rosenberger Memorial Fund. So right now in Canada, I work on the preconditioning trial in the feedlot animals, and this is to reduce the bovine respiratory disease. So how we define preconditioning is anything or any step that we do to reduce the stress in the calf or prepare the calf for the feedlot. We consider that as preconditioning, and that may include a scheduled vaccination, use of analgesic during processing, and gradual weaning of the calves, and introduction to the feed bunks. And we have, as a control group, we have another group that is called as auction-derived. With those animals, we don't know the history of the vaccination status of the weaning type of weaning that was practiced. So why BRD? We are working on BRD is a very major economic major disease of economic importance in North America. So it contributes around $30 to $150 per sick animal, and it contributes towards 70% of morbidity. And to treat those animals, it takes a lot of antimicrobial usage, which ultimately links us to the antimicrobial resistance. So that's why we are interested in doing a lot of work in bovine respiratory disease. So in that course, in that project, what we are interested is, firstly, we see the impact of preconditioning on the kinetics of immune cell using specific markers. And second, we see the impacts of preconditioning on the development of neutralizing antibodies. So over the time of my stay in University of Calgary, these are the skill sets that I developed. So main being the flow cytometry and the viral neutralization assay. And I also do a lot of cell culture work. And I also do some PCR and then sequencing of viruses, specifically bovine respiratory syncytial virus and bovine parainfluenza virus 3. So in the flow cytometry, I'm interested in seeing both the cell-mediated and humoral immune cells. So yeah, so to finally show you a brief preliminary results, this is what we have found during our study. So we found that the preconditioning animals tends to have higher, or we can say significantly difference of immune cell compared to our auction-derived calves. And those are specifically in our humoral immune cell, that is in our CD21, and then our cell-mediated immune cell that is in CD4 and WC1. And the other interesting result that we found is we have a really significant difference between the neutralizing antibodies, and then we found that our preconditioned calves have higher amount of neutralizing antibodies at the entry of the feedlot, and which can contribute and reduce a lot BRDC incidences a lot, because we because our neutralizing antibodies titer are really high in preconditioned calves. So thank you for this moment. So now let me come to the Gustav Rosenberger Memorial Fund. So I'm really fortunate and privileged to be here in Berlin, and I'm really happy that I won this award. And also I'm really excited to do my research back in my country. And I'm proud that I'm taking the award and the fund to my country. So what I'll be doing with this award is I'll be doing a serotyping of bovine FMD virus in Bhutan. And this comes from the motivation that firstly, I'm interested in translational research, and secondly, serotyping of FMD viruses in Bhutan has not been done for a long time. And although we have vaccination strategy in our country, we still get a lot of FMD outbreaks. So that's why I wanted to see the gap between the vaccination and the outbreaks. So this, to give you a fact check, this is what have been done regarding the FMD virus in Bhutan. And the last FMD virus serotyping documented FMD serotyping of FMD virus was done in 2012. And then there is no documentation after 2012. So it has been a decade. And also, like I've mentioned, my interest in my career and professional interest is in translational research, and I wanted to be a veterinary virologist, and specifically in molecular epidemiologist. So with this award, we have come up with two objectives. So firstly, we will analyze the antibodies following vaccination, which is done annually in Bhutan, and this will be done with the competitive ELISA kit. And secondly, we are interested in detecting and typing of FMD virus that is prevailing in Bhutan, and that will be done by Sandwich ELISA. So both the kits we are trying to purchase it from the Purbright Institute of UK, which is also the reference lab for FMD and vesicular viruses, and that was and the kit was developed by Isler in collaboration with the Purbright Institute of UK. And why we want to do this? So what is the significance of this study? So firstly, it has not been done for a very long time, the serotyping of FMD virus in Bhutan. And secondly, this will provide information to the farm owners as well as our practitioners in the field through a database of National Center of Animal Health, which we currently have in our country. And thirdly, it will evaluate the effectiveness of our current vaccine strategy. And also it will develop services and skill set by learning the transferable skills. And then lastly, we can design new molecular and epidemiological studies after the project. So with this, I would end my presentation, and I would like to thank especially Boehringer Ingelheim for sponsoring the Gustav Rosenberg Memorial Fund. And I would like to thank my supervisor, Dr. Frank Vandermeer, Dr. Karen Orsel, and Dr. Guido Van Marley for the continuous support. And they are and will always be influential in my life, and I always look up to them. And I also would like to thank the previous award winners and my lab members and lab mates and my colleagues back home who makes working with cows and working in lab a lot more fun. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Jordan, thank you. Jordan, thank you very much. As you probably know, we don't have as a member, we don't have as a Jordan, we don't have as a member of the World Pediatric Association the Bhutan. Therefore, I hope you will be our ambassador in Bhutan, because we need Bhutan. We need that Bhutan also join our association. Theo, just we have only 1 minute more. Perhaps you can explain better also who may be the candidate for the award, in order that we can prompt the new candidates for the next year award. Because as far as I know, we try to have candidates that can utilize the award to make research for the benefit of their country, isn't it? I don't know whether you meant it.
You want to know who can be candidates for the Rosenberg Award?
Yes, also because we have to advise and to advocate for next year. So in order to have many candidates, I suppose also.
Yeah. Submissions are open from September 1st on until Christmas. And it's young veterinarians working in bovine medicine. So that means no longer than 10 years graduated. And preferably from a country where there's lack of opportunity to develop bovine science, bovine medicine themselves, and that have a connection with a university or an educational institute of good name and fame in somewhere else in the world. And if they have good plans, then they can submit it. And as of September 1st, the submission forms will be available from our website, which is also linked through the WAB website. Does that answer your question?
Yes, perfect. Therefore, we can tell everybody that are present today that if they have some good candidate, if they know some good young researchers, young veterinarians, they can inform us about this award and tell them to participate, to apply for this award.
Sure,
perfect.
Would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. So now, thank you, Theo. Thank you, Choden. So, Choden, I told you you should be the ambassador of the World Pediatric Association in Bhutan in the future. When you will be back home, you have to develop the Pediatric Association in Bhutan. Okay,
Yeah,
thank
we
you.
should
Now,
yeah, I'm excited.
sure.
I'm looking forward. So sorry.
Yes. And yeah, okay. Now, as mentioned from the Congress here in Berlin, we wanted to take advantage of some speakers, and I'm sorry that we asked Marina to do this effort because she has just given a presentation. The presentation was 1 hour ago for 45 minutes. But yeah, we know, I think everybody of you knows Marina von Keyserling. She is professor at the University of British Columbia, and she is very committed in animal welfare. She has many publications in peer-reviewed journals. During the presentation, the president of the college mentioned more than 300 peer-reviewed presentations. Therefore, this gave us the level of Marina. But I don't want to waste time. I would like to ask then Marina. She will give a presentation on calf management. You see the title on the screen. Marina, thank you for having accepted this invitation. And just when you show in the next slide, I think you, among the sponsor and the support of your project, there is Saputo. I would like just to inform you that Saputo is also the president, or anyway, the owner of the football team in Bologna. Yes, Saputo. Thank you, Marina.
A very important point.
Yes, much appreciated. It's very important for us in Bologna.
Okay, well, thank you again for asking me to do this. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. And what I want to do over the next 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes is just talk about sort of some key steps to what we've learned about social housing. And I know that in the recent EFSA report in Europe that this is likely there's a good chance that it will be recommended that calves must be socially housed. So I'm going to walk through some of the evidence why that is a good thing. I'm also going to walk through some of the steps that are super important if you want to make this successful. So I want to start, but where we came from. And, you know, I'm hopefully in Europe, this doesn't happen anymore. Unfortunately, it still happens in a lot of farms in other parts of the world. But we came from a time when we believed that feeding calves twice a day through a bucket and providing them about 4 liters of milk per day was best practice. And when we look at what the mother does, the cow does, she nurses her calf 5 to 10 times a day, and each nursing bout lasts about 5 to 10 minutes. And on average, you know, plus or minus a couple of liters, she provides at least 10 liters of milk per day. So we are in very, very different area of, I mean, what we do is so far from natural. And so when we, early on, this is a paper published in 2001. We had a visiting scientist from the UK, and he just went in and he looked at what do calves do when they're provided lots of milk and access to a teat. And when you provide these calves free access to a teat, they spend about 47 minutes a day drinking milk. They drink that more than 10 liters a day. And lo and behold, they spread that over to about 6 to 10 meals a day, which just so happens to be very similar to the feeding behavior that they do when they're on the dam. So this just made us think about a bunch of things. And one of the things is, you know, we really wanted to see, you know, were we actually feeding calves in a way that they were hungry? And hunger is a tough one because it's an emotional state. You know, you can't, it's hard to measure, and we definitely can't ask the calves. And so Andrea de Paula Vieira was a graduate student. She was a veterinarian from Brazil. And she did a study, we published this in 2008, where we had calves in a group on an auto feeder. Half the calves were provided 4 liters of milk a day, and they could get that milk in about 2 meals, very typical, 2 meals in the morning, 2 meals in the afternoon. And the other calves could drink whenever they wanted, however much they wanted. And so here's just some of the outcome measures. So this is time spent occupying the feeder in minutes per day. And you can see that those calves that were only given 4 liters per day were spending about 105 to 110 minutes a day in the feeder. And those calves that could drink as much as they wanted, that were ad libitum, were just over an hour. So again, they're doing exactly the same thing that they would if they were beyond the mother. Now, I want you to think about early on. I mean, we still see this to some degree, but when these milk feeders came out, they were quite expensive. So the recommendation is, let's put 20 calves in the pen and we'll feed them 4 liters a day. And you can imagine what happened in terms of cross-sucking, because these calves are, and this is one of the calves that was fed 4 liters a day trying to cross-suck another calf. We just simply didn't have enough hours in the day for these calves to get all the milk that they needed. One thing that Andrea did was she went back to the video and she looked at how many times did the calves enter the feeder where they actually drank versus they went but either didn't drink or were not, it wasn't time yet. The computer said, you know, you're not allowed to have any yet. And so this, on the y-axis, we have number of unrewarded and rewarded visits, and then we've got the 2 treatments. And what you can see is that those calves that were fed ad libitum, they only went 6 or 8 times a day. 2 of the visits, they just went in and just sort of sniffed at things and then came back out again. The 4-liter calves went twice when they got their milk, and then they went about 20, 25 times to check. Because remember, I don't think calves can tell time. This is their way of checking. Oh, maybe the computer is now telling me that I can have milk. And we argued in the paper that this was some of the very first evidence that these calves were really experiencing hunger. So one of the things before you even think about social housing is you must be feeding these calves a decent amount of milk. Just some more evidence of the benefits of feeding more milk. This is some work by Mohammed Khan. In 2007, he published this. He had 2 treatments. One was 10% of body weight. These were Holstein calves, about 40 kilos. So that worked out about 4 liters in the red group. And the green and the blue group, he fed 20% body weight. And then what he did is at about 24, 25 days of age, he took this 20% body weight, and over the course of a week, he dropped them down to 10%. Took both of these treatment calves out to about day 46, and then over the next week, slowly reduced the milk, and he weaned them on day 52. Two things that I want you to notice. One, when you feed calves more milk, they drink more milk. And two, because this is 20% of body weight, that those calves that were in the step down treatment, the blue treatment, were still getting close to 6 liters after day 30 because they were simply more heavy, they were heavier. What did that do to body weight? At about 20 days of age, we see the lines really split. And remember, they were weaned at about day 52, but the advantage in body weight goes all the way out to 90 days. And this is when the experiment ended. Baby calves, before they're 30 days of age, it's almost impossible for them to eat starter. And so what they can convert to lean tissue growth really, really well is milk. We have tended to restrict milk intake because we want them to eat starter. And so this is starter intake, grams per day, and the step down are those 20% body weight, the conventional are the 10s. But look at this, even that up before 30 days, even the calves that were fed hardly any milk are not eating a lot of starter. They're physiologically just not able to do so. What they're good at is taking in milk. Those calves, and remember at about day 28, the calves that were fed higher volumes of milk were reduced in milk. And then you can see what happens to the starter intake is it really starts to pick up. And that advantage is maintained up to the end of the experiment at 90 days. So many people, what they do is they give a little bit of an amount of milk at the beginning. So the first 3 or 4 works. And then as the calf gets bigger, let's give more milk. What we're saying is actually flip that on its head. Give the calf as much milk as it can drink in the first 3 to 4 weeks, then ride it down a little bit, and then take them out until at whatever time you want to wean. Don't do anything fast. Everything has to be, slow and steady, because you're still, even at 52 days of age or at 60 days, or even if we were to wean them at 90 days, you are weaning much, much younger than they would ever wean in nature. How much milk? This is some work that we did. This is Katarina Rosenberger's work, a visiting student. This is milk intake liters per day on the y-axis and the experimental day on the x-axis. So day 25, 30, 35. At about day 34, they were dropped down in milk over a little bit, and then they were carried out and then weaned at about day 50. And what you can see is the more milk you give, the more milk they drink. This is unrewarded visits. So this is when we started, and what's important here, these are the times they go to the feeder, but the computer says, no, it's not your time yet, okay? Most interesting here are 6 liters, which is 2 liters more than we used to feed. When we look at when the milk was dropped down at about day 32 or 33 of day of age, those calves that were fed 6 liters a day are going to the feeder far, far more often than the calves in the other treatment. The higher the milk, the lower the unrewarded visits. And this means that I think they're bigger, they're more likely to engage in starter intake. When we look at, and this is also interesting, I think, because I think in the new EFSA report, the recommendation is that calves should be given access to hay starting at, I believe, if I remember correctly, at about 2 weeks of age. This was some work that Mohammed did in our lab as a part of his postdoc. And in North America, I'm not really sure how it is here in Europe, but for decades, there's been this push by industry to say, no, don't feed any starter, any hay during the milk feeding period, because the calves, their rumens get really big and it's just not good for them. I think in some ways that narrative was an artifact of the fact that we were starving these calves. And when you look at some of the really old literature where that was done on trying to develop the ideal starter, the ideal grain for calves, you go back to some of that literature and most of it is done on slatted floors. And when you ask those researchers, why did you do that work on slatted floors? What the answer you get back is if we had them on straw or if we had them on sawdust, they ate the sawdust. And I think this, rather than trying to understand why the calves were eating the sawdust or eating the straw, the solution was just take it away. And so we went through, probably 40 years of saying they shouldn't have access to hay, that we should just have access to starter, and don't feed them a lot of milk because we want them to eat starter. In Khan's study, these calves were all fed 20% of body weight, so a minimum of 8 liters. And we had 2 treatments. We looked at just feeding starter during the during the milk feeding period, and then allowing those calves, half the calves had starter plus hay. So this is intake in grams per day of the starter, dry matter intake, starter and starter plus hay. And what you can see, both groups ate starter, but those calves that had access to hay ate more dry matter intake because they also had access to the straw. What did this actually turn out to be? We did a bunch of male calves and we slaughtered those calves at 10 weeks of age. So I think they were weaned at 7 weeks of age. So this is 3 weeks after weaning had ended. And we looked at rumen pH and also rumen weight. And what you can see is that those calves that had access to starter plus forage had higher rumen pH than those that only had starter. And this has been my mantra for years, I think many calves are suffering from acidosis. And then we look at the weight of the rumen apparatus. We'd emptied it out, or I say we, Khan did all this. Khan emptied it out and you weighed the rumen apparatus. And what we can see here is that those calves that had forage early on in life had a more developed rumen than those calves that only got starter. To me, this all makes sense. I grew up on a beef cattle ranch, and beef calves, they don't eat. I think we've always thought that eating something more is better. I think what these calves are looking for is access to some forage, and it could be just a little bit, that scratch factor early on, as their goal in life is to become a ruminant. And so I don't think just the starter alone is able to do that. I know there's a lot of scientists that think I'm crazy, but to me, nature tells us that these calves are looking for some sort of forage in their diet early on. Oops. Okay. We also know that feeding calves more milk early on, they're going to pay you back later in life. So there's growing evidence that pre-weaning weight gains predict future productivity, especially in the first lactation. And so there's been a number of studies that have done that. And so this is particularly this improved weight gains in the first 3 to 4 weeks of life are, set these calves up to become very good milk cows down the road. And I often say, she's paying it forward. Just feed her properly now and she'll pay you later on in milk. Okay, so number 1 is you've got to feed through a nipple, and you've got to be feeding these calves so they're not hungry. If you're not doing that, social housing is not an option, because cross-sucking, disease, all of that is going to be rampant. But if you're doing those things, this feeding more milk via a nipple, don't do anything abruptly, I would argue strongly for forage. If you're doing all that, then you can start talking about social housing. So this first experiment is again by Andrea Vieira. So she looked at the most simple social group you could have, which is an individual versus a pair. So these calves were housed in exactly the same pens. All we did was take out the middle for the pair. So they each calf got a milk bottle. They had a bucket of water. They had access to some forage. They had the starter. They were fed 8 liters a day, twice a day, the bottles in the morning and the bottles in the afternoon. So you can look, they're exactly the same thing. And then we had individual, pair, individual, pair, individual. And so she ran all these calves. So the first thing she did is she looked at starter intake, and everything was the same, except for the fact that half the calves had a friend. And so this is looking at starter intake and grams per day. And you can see that if you have a friend, those calves that had a friend in their pen ate more starter during the milk feeding period than those calves that were individual. And what we think is happening here is what's called social facilitation. So the calves each had their bucket. The one calf started eating, maybe started nibbling at the starter, and then the other calf came and said, oh, they're doing that, let me try. And so we had this social facilitation. The next thing she did is she weaned them. She would always wean an individual and a pair together. And she looked at vocalizations. And so this is calls, the number per 2 hour. She started weaning on day 48 and she rode the milk down slowly. But what you can see is, and these calves are in the same pen, same barn, individual pair, and then across about 1.5 meters of the alley are individual pair, individual. So the individual calves could see other calves, but they couldn't touch another calf. And what you can see is that if you're going to go through a stressful event like weaning, it's way better off to go with a friend than it is to go by yourself. So we saw this significant reduction in this distress response. The calves stayed in those individual and pair house pens for a week after weaning. And then what she did is she took a pair and an individual, so 3 calves, and she put them in a group house pen. 3 of the calves already knew how to use the grain feeder. And remember, in their original pens, they only had access to buckets. 3 of the calves in the pen already knew how to use the grain feeder. And then she put the individual and the pair in here. And she looked at the latency to start using the grain feeder, an apparatus that they'd never seen before. The time to start feeding after the mixing, the regrouping, you can see that those individual calves took almost 50 hours before they had their first meal. The pair house calves got it in 9. Andrea at that time, and I'll show you some results in a subsequent experiment, said they were like, the individual calves were like yo-yos or bouncing balls. They just didn't know how to navigate in that environment. She then took those calves and she looked at solid feed intake for 2 weeks post mixing or post putting in the pen. And what you can see, not surprising, because they hadn't eaten for 2 days. Those calves that didn't eat for 2 days ate a ton. And then I'm convinced they had acidosis. And then they dropped. And what does a ruminant do when it's got a tummy ache? It doesn't eat. They backed off feed, felt better, ate a lot, and then came back down again. Whereas the pair house calves never really missed a beat. And what did this look like in weight gain? If you don't eat for 2 days, you lose almost 2.5 kilos. You gain a kilo, you lose a kilo, you gain a kilo, you lose a kilo. This feeding pattern is exactly what you would see in feedlot diets of beef cattle fed high grain diets. And I think it's their way of coping with acidosis. So one of the things she then did in a subsequent experiment is she took an individual calf and she put it in a pen with a pair house calf that it had never met. And the individual calf here is the calf with more white. And what you see is that calf is totally focused on that pair house calf, is scared of it. We had significantly longer latencies to touch the calf. And then once it touched the calf, it didn't know how to leave it alone. It had never learned the social norms of what it means to be a calf living in a herd. If I were to have asked that individually housed calf, if it could talk, if I could have interviewed it and asked it after the test, what did the pen look like that you were just in? I don't think it could tell me anything because it never explored its environment. All it did was focus on the other calf. This are 2 pair house calves that have never met each other. It's a really boring video. Super calm. They nose touch right away. And then the 2 of them go and they explore the environment. And I can't tell you how many farms I've been in where, after weaning and they group house these calves where somebody says, well, we can't touch those calves for a week because they're just crazy. Well, I think we've prevented them from learning how to be a calf, learning in a herd, living in a herd because we've individually housed them. I've also heard benefits from farmers who've pair house calves early on say it's much easier to train them to the robot. I mean, we haven't tested that, but they just say they're calmer, easier to handle. They don't freak out, which I think also speaks to, safety in employees and animal handling. So what about you know, this cognition. And so there's some old work by Harry Harlow looking at, and I mean, you'd never get ethics approval to do this now. This is in the 60s, where he took these baby little monkeys and he housed half of them by themselves with a puppet mom and the other half in a very complicated troop with lots of mothers and lots of little baby chimps, and then tested them. I think kept them there for a year, and then he tested the offspring. And what he found is these individually reared monkeys had cognitive rigidity, behavioral flexibility, and high rates of food neophobia. We had a student come from France that had studied human psychology, had never been on a dairy farm in her life, and comes and sees these individual housing of calves and says, these calves, there must be huge cognitive deficits. So what do? Somebody says that, we run an experiment. And so we kept calves individual and pair housed. And then we also, no, actually this one, what we did is we mimicked the completely. We had individually housed calves, and then we had calves that were reared with the dam in a pen with a bunch of other cows and a bunch of other calves. And it was a really complicated thing. Our farm manager nearly had a heart attack, but we did it. And then what they did with the calves is that they individually, and these mother reared calves, is they taught them to play a game. And I've got a video here. So calves were clicker trained to nose touch the start box. And then once they hit the start box, the screen would change. Half the calves were white, half the calves were red. So in this calf, red is positive. If it turns red, he can go touch the screen and he would get a milk reward. White was obviously the negative, and then they had to wait. If they touched on the wrong one, they had a timeout. So we taught all the calves. This is the discrimination learning. It doesn't matter how you were raised. You can learn this game. And let me tell you, the calves loved, they almost danced down the alleyway in preparation of learning the game. So these are the correct no-go responses. The number of sessions is along the x-axis. 1 would be the first day in the morning. 2 is the first day in the afternoon. So this is 7 days. Day 1, day 2, day 3. And you can see, I mean, a little bit of a bump here, but really by a week later, all the calves learned how to play the game. Not a problem. Then we changed the rules. Those calves where white was positive, now when they went to white, they got a timeout. They had to learn how to go to the red. They had to go to the other color. And this is where things got really interesting. Those calves, like all calves, the first day, they got it all wrong. The calves, though, that were socially housed with their mom, what they, like a day and a half, it was like, okay, you want me to go to the opposite side. And they learned how to do it. The individual calves never learned how to do the task. They continually reversed to the individual, to the color that they learned first. They were unable to be sort of this cognitive flexibility was compromised. And I have no idea if this is true, but I remember one farmer telling him, I showed him this data and he goes, that explains it. He goes, I've got a parallel parlor. And when I teach my cows and they go in, learn how to go in from the left, it's no problem. And on the occasion, when they get mixed up and they have to go on the right, it is a disaster. I have no idea if that's true, but the prediction would be that they would have trouble learning how to go to the opposite way. So what we also then did, because obviously, and this is done in 2015, where you can imagine the whole world thought we were crazy keeping cows and calves together, is we did a subsequent trial where we looked at individual for the entire milk feeding period, pair housed for the entire milk feeding period, individual for the first 6 weeks, we weaned at 8 weeks, and then pair housed in the last 2 weeks, and then again, looking at the social complex environment. And in this particular study with the cows and calves, the cows were separated for a half day, but I think that was, for this purposes, didn't matter. And then we again looked at the reversal. So this is just the success of relearning the task. And again, the individuals failed miserably. The late pair was not as good as the early pairing or the group, but it was better than the individual. And this is what I say to veterinarians or people working with farms. You know, some farms, you may not want to do pair house because there's 1,000 other things that are wrong. But if you try to introduce this, at least in the last 2 weeks, you're still going to get some benefits. So my conclusions are, feed calves more milk via nipple, don't wean abruptly. Calves want to become ruminants. Forage appears to play an important role in facilitating this transition, as long as they're fed at least 8 liters a day. And individual housing impairs cognition, makes calves fearful, and increases weaning distress. Social housing in pairs or small groups provides multiple advantages. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Nina, for this very interesting presentation. It seems to be that when we consider the calves, it is also good if we imagine to be a calf, and what we like is the same that the calf life. So not to be unrewarded when we go to, let's say, to drink a beer, to ask for a beer, or also to stay together with friends when we do something. So this social facilitation is for sure something good, not only for us, but it seems to be also for calves. We have some time for some questions. Usually we don't have a long discussion time, because we try to keep our webinar in 1 hour. But if there are some questions from the floor, people, please feel free to ask Marina. It is a very good occasion to do this. Otherwise, in any case, all our webinars are available on the YouTube channel of the World Bariatric Association, and therefore you can find also the record of the presentation. So I don't know whether there are some question. As I told you, Marina, usually we don't have discussion session, but anyway, it is very good that we talk about also the question of how much liter, how many milk calves should be fed. It's almost a never-ending story. I would say for many years now we have already said that calves should be offered more milk, but it seems to be that it is a difficult message to be understood from the farmers, from the veterinarians. Do you have a comment on this, Marina?
I just said, if anybody wants, if it's of help with in your workplace, if you want my presentation, just email me. I think there is there added value in housing cows and calves versus paired housing 2 calves? I mean, I didn't show it. We did see that calves with their pair housing also reduces food neophobia. So if you give them if you put them in an arena and there's a bucket at the end with some strange feed in it, individual house calves are super scared. They take them forever to get the bucket, and they just takes them a long time to even try to eat what's in there. I mean, we had chopped carrots and stuff. Pair house calves, much quicker to go investigate, much more likely to eat the novel feed. We did see a slight advantage for those calves with cows and calves that had their mother. And again, from an evolutionary perspective, that makes sense. They do tend to follow the older animals to learn from them. So for instance, there's some very cool work from, he's long retired, a guy called Fred Provenza at Colorado State, did a lot of work on sheep, but also on cattle, that, calves learn which plants are poisonous from their mother. So there is advantages to that. But, I think if we can get the world to go to pair housing smoothly, that's step 1. I'm very much, as if you heard anybody that heard my talk, I think cow-calf contact is coming. But it's, some of your really outstanding farmers may be able to do this well, but we need to do some research to try to minimize the risk. And a lot of the talks I do now is a call to action from the scientific community to help with that transition. And at first it's going to be a niche market, but I've talked to a few farmers. There's one farmer in the UK that's been doing it a long time, and he only is around because after whatever the first try, he was going broke, and there was a GoFundMe community money drive to help him get through. So they got like £12,000 to help him and his wife over the top. We can't have that. We can't have farmers going broke. So and we need to learn from those farmers that are doing it well. But yeah, sorry, that was a long-winded question. I just wanted to one comment that just, Arcangelo, what you said about one of the challenges that farmers and even I would argue veterinarians have with feeding calves more milk is we've been trained for so long what scours or diarrhea looks like. And so we're so used to seeing quite dry stool in limit fed calves because they have very little water volume, right? I mean, some of them don't even have access to water. I mean, I've been on farms where, they're feeding milk 4 liters a day and they don't get access to water. You can hardly get, blood out of these calves because they're so dehydrated. Well, any animal that's producing stool under those environments, it's going to be really dry and really hard. And that's become the norm. You feed a calf 8 liters of milk a day and you're going to have loose stool. It doesn't mean that it's sick. And so it's really talking to the farmer about the fact that they are going to produce more volume. The other thing I've seen is, okay, I'm going to do individual housing or pair housing, but I'll put 2 calves in 1 hutch. A total disaster because you also have twice as much liquid. You got to up your game. And then the farmer has a heart attack because the calves are all dirty. Well, 2 calves, 2 hutches, and you can do it quite inexpensively, just run a fence around it. But think about these also from a practical perspective.
Thank you, Marina. There was a comment from Philip Kukla. Is there an added value in housing cow and calves versus pirate housing? 2 calves, I think this also you have already answered this. Thank you, Philip, for the question. Yeah, I would say now it's 5 past 4 in Europe. Marina, thank you again for your kindness, for your availability today. Thank you, Jordan, and good luck for your future. Much appreciated, Teolam, for the presentation of the Rosenberger Award. As already mentioned, all our webinars are on the YouTube channel of the World Association for Bouillatric. At the beginning of the presentation, I shared the invitation for the next World Bouillatric Congress in Cancun 2024, May 2024. I think you can see here the Congress here in Berlin now is during the coffee break. And yes, therefore, thank you for everybody for having participated. I see from the name of the participants that practically all the world is represented, perhaps not a huge number, but for sure from all over the world. And this is also a good thing. Thank you, everybody. See you at the next webinar. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye to everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, everyone.
Ciao.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Ciao.